A debtor's daughter like her should count it a blessing just to be alive. Under the blistering noon sun of Eden Hollow, the cutting words fell from the lips of a wealthy ranch heir. High upon his black stallion, Ezekiel Boone sat tall, his cold blue eyes sweeping over Clara as though she were nothing more than sport. Before him, Clara, her dress faded, her back bent beneath the crushing weight of her father's debt, lifted sack after sack of grain in silence, sweat staining the worn fabric. The crowd followed his sneer, their whistles and jeers striking her like whips, turning her quiet endurance into a public jest. But none could foresee that the woman they mocked would one day stand unshaken in the storm, the one to save Boone Ranch from ruin. Nor could they imagine that Ezekiel himself, the man who once smirked at her burden, would kneel trembling to beg her to stay. And when that day came, Eden Hollow would bow its head in silence, forced to confess the truth. The woman they had once dismissed as a shadow was, in fact, the irreplaceable treasure of the West. Eden Hollow's square lay beneath the searing blaze of a summer noon. The sun poured down hard enough to melt the red dust that clung to the ground. Hooves stirred the dirt into clouds, mixing with the scent of leather and sweat from the crowded marketplace. Amid that scene, a small, quiet figure stood out, not for finery, but for her relentless, unyielding labor. Clara Mayfield, 30 years old, her dark skin filmed with dust, her faded dress patched and mended too many times, bent low beneath the burden of heavy grain sacks. Her narrow shoulders trembled under the weight, roughened hands clutching the straps so they wouldn't slip. Each step pressed deep into the hardened ground, weary yet steadfast. Folks stopped to watch, not with sympathy, but with ridicule. Glances sharpened with scorn, whistles laced with mockery, and whispered words cut like the edge of a thin blade. A black woman in debt. What could she know but cooking? A man slurred, drawing laughter from those nearby. A vegetable seller shook her head, lips pressed tight in disdain. Even children mimicked the groan, whispering among themselves before bursting into cruel laughter, pointing at Clara as though she were a jest. She gave no reply, did not stop. The way Clara lowered her head, lips pressed firm, pouring her strength into the sacks on her back. It was as though the labor itself was the only armor she owned against the invisible barbs. Beneath the scorching light, sweat trickled down her cheek, fell into the dust, and vanished without notice. High on a black stallion, visible above the crowd, sat Ezekiel Boone. 25, tall, sun-browned, his deep blue eyes held the confidence of pride. He was the only son of the Boone family, owners of one of the richest ranches in the territory. In a white shirt trimmed with leather, brand-new riding trousers, and polished boots, Ezekiel was the very image of frontier arrogance. He reined in, took in the sight, and let a smirk curl across his lips. To Ezekiel, the picture of Clara bent beneath the sacks was nothing more than a cheap performance, something to pass the time, a show of degradation. In his mind, the thought came easily. A debtor's daughter like her should count herself blessed just to be alive. What more was there to see? He sat tall in the saddle, gaze sliding over her without concealing his contempt. The crowd, catching his expression, followed suit, as if the young Boone's permission had loosed their cruelty. Clara knew it all. Her ears long accustomed to whispers, her eyes to cutting stares. Habit did not mean numbness. Her chest ached with every beat, yet her hands never loosened. She drew a sharp breath, The taste of dust and sweat choked her throat. One more sack, and then another. Each time she laid one down, she straightened, wiped her brow with the hem of her dress, and bent again. An old man by the roadside watched, his eyes holding a sympathy he dared not voice. He knew Clara bore more than sacks of grain. She bore the debt her father left behind after death. Debt had chained her into endless work, her strength spent coin by coin to pay it off. And because of her skin, many saw that labor not as valor, but as the mere duty of the lowly. Across the street, Ezekiel glanced toward his parents. They stood silent, their eyes upon Clara with an unreadable thoughtfulness. He smirked. Do they pity her too? There was nothing remarkable there but a bent back and swollen hands. To Ezekiel, born into wealth, pride unbent, he saw nothing but the ordinary, nothing but the low. And yet, to others, the image bore a different weight. A mother with a child in her arms sighed as she watched. A blacksmith shook his head, uneasy, powerless. Somewhere in their hearts, all felt the rare steel within the woman's steps, but none spoke, for fear that compassion would make them the next target of mockery. Still, the moment dissolved, swallowed up by Ezekiel Boone's cold eyes and his smirk. He jerked his chin, tapped his boots to his horse, and rode away in a cloud of dust, leaving contempt in his wake. In his heart, what he had seen left no mark but boredom. That day in Eden Hollow, beneath the cruel noon sun, the scene carved itself into silence. A black woman, diligent yet dismissed, forced to walk on, for to stop would mean to fall. Evening fell faster than usual, the sun sinking behind the western ridges and leaving a sky the color of scorched copper. Eden Hollow braced itself for the onset of a dust storm, familiar, yet always feared. The wind howled across the plain, whipping up spirals of red grit that stung skin and scorched the hides of horses. Rolling clouds of gray surged over half the sky, swallowing the light. At the edge of the pasture, Ezekiel Boone gripped the reins of his black stallion, frowning at the scene before him. Hundreds of cattle had grown restless, hooves pounding, horns thrashing, eyes flashing red with panic. Their lowing blended with the rising wind, a thunderous drumbeat that made the ground tremble beneath his boots. One ranch hand shouted, his voice breaking, "The storm's here! If they stampede, the season's lost!" Ezekiel hauled hard on the reins, shouting commands, but the wind devoured his words. His horse reared, shrieking, nearly unseating him. He lashed the whip down, but the animal only grew wilder. Dust cloaked his vision until all he could see were dark horns crashing against each other, pressing toward the fence. His heart hammered. For the first time, the heir born to wealth and ease felt himself small against the raw force of nature. He roared again, but the cry was swallowed whole. Boards along the fence splintered and snapped. Ruin was seconds away. Then, from the shadow of the supply shed, a figure burst forth. Clara Mayfield, her faded dress whipping against her legs, clutched a torch blazing with fire. Sweat streaked her face, curls of black hair flying loose, eyes fierce and unyielding. "Back off, Ezekiel!" Her voice cut above the storm. Without waiting for his response, she plunged straight into the sea of cattle, brandishing the torch high. Fire, ancient, primal terror, sliced through the chaos. Clara ran the line of the fence, the torch sketching circles of light in the crimson haze. The cattle balked, eyes rolling, bodies jerking away from the flame and turning back toward the safety of the pen. Each time they pressed forward, Clara swung the torch wide, shouting them down, driving them back. Ezekiel sat frozen. He, who had ridden proud through the town square, now watched powerless as that small, stubborn woman stood against the fury of hundreds of beasts. One calloused hand, one torch, one unbreakable will, and the disaster broke against her like water on stone. The ranch hands stared, stunned. Never had they seen a woman, least of all a black woman, charge into a maddened herd. Their fear gave way to awe, then to cheers. They snatched up more torches, running to flank her, following her lead. Slowly, the cattle were turned, driven into the corral, their frenzy ebbing into heavy snorts and stamping hooves. The wind still screamed, dust still swirled, but the greatest danger had passed. Clara stood at the gate, her torch guttering low, the sleeve of her dress torn, her hem caked in dirt and sweat. Her chest rose and fell hard, but in her eyes burned the fire of victory. Ezekiel dismounted, his boots crunching into the dust. He stared at her, the thought burning undeniable in his mind. She saved them. She saved the Boone herd. She saved Boone Ranch itself. An old hand muttered, "Without her, we'd be counting carcasses right now." Others nodded, their eyes filled with a respect they did not know how to voice, unsettled by the strangeness of praising a black woman. Clara said nothing. She handed the dying torch to a hand, wiped her brow with her sleeve, and kept her gaze on the cattle now settling behind the fence. A gust lifted her hair, glinting the sweat that streaked her sun-worn face. In that instant, Ezekiel found no mocking words. Instead, something unfamiliar gnawed at him, an unease, an awe, almost a shame. He, who had sworn he needed no woman of color to play the hero, was forced to face the truth. It was Clara who had saved it all. He opened his mouth, but the words died. Pride sealed his throat. His hand tightened on his whip, his body stiff with conflict as he stared at her like a man seeing her for the first time. At last, Ezekiel turned back, boots dragging in the dust. He stopped once, glanced over his shoulder, torn by a thought he could not speak. The word "thank you" pressed hot on his tongue, but pride held it caged. He let out a low grunt instead, mounted up, and spurred his stallion into the storm. Clara lifted her head, watching him vanish into the dark. Her gaze held no plea. She had not faced the herd for thanks or praise, but for survival, for the debt still hanging over her and the wages she had yet to earn. The night after the dust storm, Boone Ranch lay in silence. The herd, spent from the chaos, lay still in their pens, and the scent of earth and grit lingered heavy in the air. Inside the main house, Hoyt and Miriam Boone sat at the wooden table. They spoke little, exchanging only glances, until at last Miriam sighed softly. "If our son does not learn discipline from that girl, he will lose everything." That settled the matter. By morning, Ezekiel received his father's order. He was to work alongside Clara Mayfield in the barns. Ezekiel stepped into the yard with a storm on his face. Dawn light silvered the fields, and the ranch hands were already at their tasks, though every eye turned to watch him. He, who had been raised to command respect, was now ordered to stand level with a woman he still despised. The insult burned with every step. Clara had been there since the gray edge of morning. She wore a coarse but clean dress, a small ledger, and dull pencil in her hands. Her deep brown eyes fixed on the papers spread across the wooden table. Calloused fingers flipped invoices, marking neat notes in the margins. Her curls were tied back, loose strands ruffled by the cool dawn wind. When Ezekiel's shadow fell across the table, Clara lifted her gaze for only a moment before returning to her writing. No greeting, no jest, no acknowledgement of the Boone heir's presence. The indifference stoked Ezekiel's temper. He planted his hands on his hips, voice sharp. "I was ordered here. Don't think you have the right to command me." Clara looked up again, her eyes calm as a still pond. "I've no need to command. I work. If you'd rather stand there fuming, that's your choice." The words, light as breath, struck hard at his pride. Ezekiel's jaw clenched, his hand tightening on his riding crop. He was not accustomed to being ignored, much less answered so plainly by a woman. He dragged a chair out and dropped into it, snatching a pile of papers. "Give me that. I'll do it myself, and we'll see if you're half as clever as you think." Clara slid a stack of old ledgers across the table. "Invoices from last month. Find what's wrong if you can." Ezekiel bent low, eyes scanning the scrawled numbers. His brow furrowed, then deeper still. Rows of crooked sums, overlapping signatures, crossed-out figures, like stumbling blind through a maze. He slammed the papers down. "This is a mess! No one could make sense of it." Clara shrugged. "I do, every week." Heat rose in Ezekiel's face. He could not fathom how she endured hours buried in such drudgery. He threw his pencil down. "This is beneath Boone time. My work is to ride, to command, not to scratch at numbers like some hired hand." Clara's gaze softened, but her words did not bend. "The herd does not live on pride. It lives on grass, water, and accurate reckoning. Without the numbers, you command nothing." The truth caught in his throat. Rage welled as he faced the sting of her words. All his life he had been praised as strong, clever heir to the ranch. Yet today a woman of color spoke plain that he knew nothing. He shoved back from the table, ready to storm off. But the ranch hands, glancing from the stables, held him in place. To leave now would be to concede defeat. He drew a breath through his teeth, dropped back into the chair, and seized his pencil. "Fine. I'll do it. Let's see just how far your wisdom goes." Clara did not smile, did not taunt. She turned another page, slid it toward him, her voice even. "Then start by adding this column. Miss one, and the herd goes hungry. Prove yourself by getting it right." The air between them stretched taut as wire. Ezekiel bent low again, sweat breaking on his brow though the morning air was cool. The figures swam before his eyes. Each error drew fresh anger. Beside him, Clara worked in silence, her pencil scratching steady, her posture calm. Once he lifted his eyes and caught her profile in the light. A face not radiant, not adorned, but patient, composed. The quiet strength unsettled him. Why did she not sneer? Why did she not mock him while he floundered? As if reading his thought, Clara spoke, her tone measured. "I don't work to prove I'm better than anyone. I work to pay what's owed, to keep this ranch alive. If you thought the same, perhaps things would go smoother." Ezekiel said nothing. Her words landed like a weight on his chest. Never had he thought of Boone Ranch as survival, never as debt. To him, it was inheritance. To her, it was life itself. For a fleeting instant, he felt small. But pride surged to smother it, and he bent over the page again, determined to outlast her in silence. By the time the sun lifted higher, spilling gold across the table, Ezekiel finished a page at last. He leaned back, forcing a grin. There. Not so hard. Clara pulled the sheet to her side, scanned it once and set it aside. 4 mistakes. Color flamed his face. His fist struck the table. You! She cut him off, her voice calm, cool. Mistakes are corrected. No one blames you for them. But if they remain, tomorrow there may be no herd left to ride. No mockery, only truth. Ezekiel sagged back in his chair, breath ragged. His pride stung deeper than the lash of a whip. He loathed the feeling, yet part of him knew she was right. Outside, the morning wind carried the smell of fresh grass across the fields. Inside, 2 figures sat across the same table, a proud man forced to face his limits, and a quiet woman who needed no acknowledgement to keep working. And so began the first day of the quiet arrangement. Morning rose over Eden Hollow through a veil of thin mist. Roosters crowed in the distance, their calls mingling with the clatter of chains from restless horses in their stalls. Boone Ranch seemed to wake heavy from the dust storm's weight, damp earth still clinging to the air, the smell of fresh grass tangled with the sharp tang of leather. In the small office by the stables, a rough wooden table lay buried under ledgers, invoices, and yellowed slips of paper. Ezekiel Boone entered with a scowl. He belonged to the saddle and open fields, not to cramped rooms choked with ink and numbers. Each strike of his boots against the floor resounded like a protest, his hand braced against his hip, eyes narrowed in resentment. Clara Mayfield was already there. She adjusted the stub of a pencil against her notebook, her curls bound back, her face composed in quiet concentration. When his shadow fell across her work, she looked up only once before returning to her task. Ezekiel gave a derisive snort, his voice sharp with pride. This is humiliation. I am Boone blood, and you are nothing but a debtor. To place me beside you is laughable. Clara set her pencil down and met his glare. Her deep brown eyes held no fire, no fear, only steadiness. You have land. I have labor. Life has taught me no one stands above the work itself. The words landed clean and hard. No bitterness, no plea, only truth. Ezekiel faltered, caught off guard. She had not lowered her head, nor raised her voice. She had simply leveled him with fact. He snatched a bundle of papers, tossed them onto the table. Fine then. Let's see what lesson you think to teach me. Clara drew the stack toward her, flipping through. Invoices stained with smudged ink, careless signatures, hastily scrawled numbers. Her fingers stilled on one yellowed slip, tapping lightly on the figures. This one, she murmured. Are you certain this is your father's hand? Ezekiel frowned, leaning in. The signature was familiar, yet off. Lines less firm, strokes wavering. Of course, it's his. Boone Ranch has never been cheated by trifles like this. Clara spread more invoices beside it. Look closer. The older ones. His pen strikes clean, strong. Here it falters. And the count of cattle sold doesn't match the herd records. This slip inflates the sale by 20 head. Ezekiel snatched it back, scanning furiously. The numbers didn't align. His jaw tightened. It could be a mistake. Clara shook her head. Once could be mistake. But 4 slips in a row, each padded. Boone Ranch has bled near half its stock this season. That signature is forged. Her words hit like a hammer. Ezekiel's mind reeled back to the man he trusted. the trader who'd shared whiskey, spoken of profit and honor. The notion that he'd been cheated, deceived under his very nose, seared his pride red hot. "No," he whispered, voice raw. Clara pressed on, her pencil stabbing the figures. "This isn't error. It's theft, calculated and patient. Leave it unchecked and Boone Ranch will be nothing but a name, and you will be the fool who let it happen." Silence thickened the room. Outside, the wind stirred the fence line. A cow's low bellow rolled like an omen. Ezekiel's fists curled so tight his nails bit flesh. Rage warred with shame. Rage at betrayal, shame at blindness. He, the heir who prided himself on knowing all, had been made a fool on his own land. He raised his eyes. Clara's gaze met his, steady, neither triumphant nor expectant. Only the stern weight of someone who valued truth above pride. Ezekiel's chest burned. He longed to lash back, to call her a liar, to accuse her of spinning fear. But the numbers glared plain. The forgeries were undeniable. His throat tightened. If you're right, then I've nearly lost everything." Clara folded the papers neatly, set them aside. "Not nearly. You are losing it, day by day. Don't trust my word. Trust the numbers." The words carved into him deeper than rebuke. A crack split the fortress of his pride. He sat silent, unable to deny. Clara bent again to her work, pencil moving steadily, as if uncovering fraud were but another duty in her long ledger of labor. No need for recognition, no wish for praise. Work was survival, and survival meant debt paid, life preserved. Ezekiel watched her hands, calloused, sure, turning each page, and felt a thought strike him unbidden. Perhaps this woman, dismissed by the town as nothing, was the first shield that stood between Boone Ranch and ruin. Outside, the morning light spilled golden across the table, washing away the storm's dust. Inside, the air was heavy with silence, and in that silence Ezekiel knew everything he had once scorned had just saved what he thought was forever his. Day after day, the air around Boone Ranch grew heavy, like a sky bracing for storm. Ezekiel Boone and Clara Mayfield still worked side by side, but whenever their eyes met, the air seemed to freeze. Clara kept to the ledgers, calculating hay bales, sacks of grain, every dollar spent. Ezekiel followed grudgingly, tallying cattle, checking corrals, though the displeasure on his face was plain for all to see. The ranch hands watched, wary and curious. They had known Ezekiel only as the proud Boone heir astride his stallion, boasting of wild rides and victories. Now they saw him bent over a ledger beside a black woman. Whispers turned to rumors, rumors to smirks. One noon, under the stable's awning, the crew gathered to rest after cutting hay. Sunlight fell in harsh patches across the ground. Clara sat hunched over her notes, her faded dress darkened with sweat, her pencil scratching across the page. Ezekiel stood nearby, whip in hand, scowling. A young hand chuckled. "At this rate, the boss'll be gray-haired before Miss Mayfield's done with her sums." The joke spread, laughter swelling like a taunt. Ezekiel heard every word. His pride pricked raw, he spun on them, his voice cutting sharp. "She'll die with her debts and that faded dress. Nothing else for the world to remember." The words slashed cold, not only at Clara, but as a proclamation to the men. He still stood above her. Silence hung for half a breath. Then snickers broke out, harder, crueler, their sound striking Clara like blows. She lifted her head. For an instant, her dark eyes trembled, her hand stilled upon the page. The weight of their stares pressed like nails. Yet she bowed again, her pencil steady, her letters straight. Ezekiel faltered. He had expected tears, fury, retreat, something to affirm his superiority. Instead, her silence, her upright spine, the absence of even one falling tear, unsettled him. The noon passed in the smell of cut hay, the hiss of wind. When the hands scattered back to work, only Clara's pencil scratched on. Ezekiel, left in the quiet, found the laughter echoing in his mind, harsh and bitter. That night, Boone Ranch lay hushed beneath a pale moon. Insects rasped in the fields. Clara sat alone in the stable, her back against the wooden wall, horses breathing warm beside her. The scent of straw and sweat of beasts wrapped the air. She drew her knees close, staring at her calloused hands. The words from noon replayed, carved deep. She'll die with her debts and that faded dress. Each syllable like a thorn lodged in her heart. For a moment her eyes burned, but Clara clenched her teeth, pressed her head against the wall, whispering into the dark, "I won't cry, never for those who scorn me." The vow was soft, but in the silence it rang like steel. She closed her eyes, let the ache sink inward instead of spilling out. A draft whistled through the gaps in the boards, carrying the sweet scent of hay, soothing as a gentle hand. Clara pressed her palm to her chest, feeling her heart race. All her life she had known scorn, skin, debt, station. But hearing it from Ezekiel Boone, the man she had saved in the cattle storm, the man his parents trusted, cut sharper than the rest. One young colt pushed its head from the stall, nudging her shoulder. Clara laughed faintly, stroking its mane. "At least you don't care about faded dresses or ledgers," she murmured. The smile was thin, sad as moonlight. Yet in her eyes a spark of defiance still glowed. She would not fall. She had debts to pay, work to finish, life to carry on. More than that, she would not allow Ezekiel Boone nor any man to see her broken by shame. In the main house, Ezekiel tossed on his bed. The laughter of the hands rang in his ears, mingling with the sight of Clara's lifted eyes. No tears, no protest. Only silence. And that silence, to his surprise, gnawed at him. He rolled over, cursed himself. Why should he care? She was nothing but a debtor. Yet the picture of her sitting upright beneath their mockery haunted him. The men's cruel chuckles in his mind turned to the crack of a whip on his own skin. He shut his eyes, but sleep would not come. For the first time, Ezekiel Boone felt the truth. Some words, thrown carelessly, cut deeper than lashes. And tonight, it was his hand that had drawn the blade. Outside in the stable's pale light, Clara sat awake still, her back to the wall, her eyes open to the moon. The whisper she had spoken lingered in the night air. "I won't cry, never for those who scorn me." Dawn broke over Eden Hollow, the first light laying a pale gold across the fields. The air was fresh after the night winds, roosters crowing in the distance, cattle lowing in the pens. Boone Ranch stirred awake with its familiar rhythm, the scrape of shovels, the shuffle of boots in the yard. Ezekiel Boone stepped onto the porch, eyes heavy from a sleepless night. Clara's calm gaze from the evening before haunted him still. The way she had borne his cruelty in silence, refusing to yield even as laughter cut her down. The memory gnawed at him like a burr beneath the skin. He turned toward the stables, hoping to outrun the thought. But at the main gate he stopped short. Clara stood facing Henry, the town's debt collector, a man with a lined fault and eyes sharp as knives. In her arms, a small cloth pouch. She untied it, counted out coins with steady fingers, and laid them in his palm. Henry nodded, his voice gravelly. A payment in good faith. Your father's debt was heavy, but better something than nothing. Ezekiel strode forward, anger flashing. What are you doing? This is Boone business, not yours. Clara lifted her eyes, calm as ever. It is mine. My father's debt chains me still. I won't have Boone Ranch burdened with it. Ezekiel froze. He knew that sum. It was nearly all she had earned, scraped from endless hours of toil at the ranch. To her, it was everything. To him, it was nothing. He wanted to tell her she was foolish, that Boone coffers could manage, but the resolve in her gaze silenced him. What he saw there was pride. Quiet, unyielding pride that would not be stripped again. Henry left, and the yard fell still. Clara turned, her shoulders damp with sweat, her steps slow but sure. Ezekiel opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. He followed her in silence. By noon, under the hard glare of sun, Ezekiel walked the fence line with the hands when a sound rose from the far stalls, a deep, commanding whinny. His heart clenched. Midnight. The black stallion, pride of the Boone herd, pawned off 2 years ago to settle debt. He broke into a run. The stall door stood open, and there was Midnight, mane gleaming, eyes burning. Beside him stood Clara, reins in her hands, palm stroking his neck, murmuring softly. Ezekiel stopped cold. How did you bring him back? Clara's voice was steady. I redeemed him this morning. I knew Midnight was Hoyt Boone's pride. A horse like him should not stand in another man's yard. Redeemed? Ezekiel's voice cracked. With what money? Clara said nothing. She didn't need to. The truth lay plain in her silence. The coins she had scraped together, denying herself, saving every drop of sweat, had been spent on this horse. Shame swept Ezekiel. He thought of the years he had not cared, dismissing Midnight's loss as replaceable. Boone Ranch rich enough to buy another. Yet Clara, no kin, no heir, had cared enough to bring him home Midnight, tossed his head, greeting his old master. Ezekiel reached out, his hand trembling as it sank into the stallion's mane. Memories surged. His boyhood rides across the fields, his father watching from the porch. His throat tightened. He turned to Clara, voice hoarse. Why? Boone Ranch owes you, not the other way. Her answer was quiet, nearly a whisper. I won't watch a family lose its pride to neglect. If I can mend it, I will. That's all. So simple. Yet to Ezekiel, it struck like fire. He felt shame burn in him, shame that he, heir of Boone, had done less for his legacy than a woman bound to them by debt. That evening, as the sun fell low, Ezekiel stood alone on the porch, staring out across the fields. In his mind replayed the sight of Clara pressing silver into Henry's palm, of Clara leading Midnight into the stall. He thought of his parents, their lessons of pride and stewardship. He had lived blind in arrogance while she, the scorned woman, fulfilled the duty he had forsaken. Night fell, and sleep eluded him. Midnight's hooves echoed softly in the stalls. a reminder that a piece of Boone Ranch's soul had been restored, and not by him. The next morning, when Clara crossed the yard, Ezekiel stepped into her path. He met her steady brown eyes, his voice tight. "What I never did, you have done for my family." "Why?" Clara only lifted a shoulder. "Because it needed doing." So simple yet so heavy, Ezekiel had no answer, and in his chest a seed stirred, small, stubborn, of respect, of regret, and of something unnamed. The afternoon sky over Eden Hollow hung heavy with gray, as though the heavens were layered in ash. Ezekiel Boone gripped the reins, spurring his horse hard along the trail that wound toward the northern canyon. He rode alone, ignoring the shouts of ranch hands behind him. Days of festering anger drove him out, seeking wild air that might strip the noise from his head. His stallion's breath came hard, iron shoes striking sparks off stone as they clattered through the narrow gorge. The ground was slick from last night's rain, mud clinging thick. Still, Ezekiel pressed on, jaw clenched, as if outracing his own shadow. Then a boulder broke loose from the cliffside, crashing into the path. The horse reared, shrieking, throwing Ezekiel clear. He slammed against the rocky slope, his body tumbling into thorn and stone. A sharp crack tore through his left arm, pain seared white, stealing the breath from him. He tried to rise, but the earth gave way, sliding him farther down until he lay twisted, unmoving among the brush. His horse's hooves faded into distance. Only the wind keened through the canyon, cold and merciless. Ezekiel gasped, sweat chilling his skin. His broken arm throbbed with every beat of his heart, each pulse like a hammer on bone. He opened his mouth to call out, but the storm swallowed his voice. For the first time, Ezekiel Boone, the proud heir who claimed mastery over all, felt the weight of utter helplessness. Footsteps rang above, quick and sure. Clara Mayfield appeared at the rim, her slight figure outlined against the bruised sky. A coil of rope hung over her shoulder. A torch sputtered in her hand. Firelight flickered over her sun-browned face, kindling a fierce glow in her deep brown eyes. "Ezekiel!" Her voice echoed through the canyon. He looked up, forcing a bitter smile through the pain. "Come to watch me fall, have you?" Clara gave no answer. She wound the rope about her waist, fastened the other end to a tree, and began her descent. Loose stone crumbled under her boots. Dust showered down, but her grip held steady. Her faded dress snagged on thorn and tore, yet her gaze never wavered. At his side she knelt. "Save your breath. I'll get you out." Ezekiel hissed between his teeth, his pride trembling even in weakness. "You think yourself strong enough?" Clara did not look at him. She looped the rope across his chest, knotting it firm, her calloused hands shaking only slightly, but never failing. She signaled to the men who had gathered above, "Pull slow. I'll guide him." Ezekiel's body rose inch by inch, scraping rock, his broken arm screaming with each tug. Sweat poured down his face. Yet in the blur of agony, he saw Clara braced beside him, one hand gripping the knot, the other shielding his back from the jagged stone. Her breath came fast, her curls damp with sweat, plastered against her cheek. Their eyes met. And for the first time, Ezekiel saw more than composure. He saw fire, blazing, defiant, enough to set the night alight. At last they reached the rim. Ezekiel collapsed, writhing with pain, his vision clouded. Clara knelt, quick and sure, tearing open her pouch. She chewed bitter herbs, pressed them to the swollen break. He groaned, voice laced with scorn. "Planning to kill me with weeds?" Clara answered evenly, not looking up. "Stay still, if you want to keep the arm." Her hands bound the poultice tight, her breath hot against his face. The acrid smell of herbs filled the air, and in that moment, Ezekiel felt the world narrow to her eyes, bright, unflinching, burning as if with an inner flame. His voice cracked, low and raw. "In your eyes, there's fire." Clara stilled for a heartbeat, then worked on, silent. But beneath the torchlight, her cheeks flushed warm, though her hands remained steady. Night fell in full. The ranch hushed save the rasp of insects. In a small room, Clara kept vigil outside Ezekiel's bed, tending the coals of a small brazier. He lay on his side, arm wrapped in white cloth, eyes heavy with pain. She bent close, pressing the heated poultice to his wound. The scent of wild herbs and sweat clung to her. Ezekiel's chest lurched with an unfamiliar rhythm. For the first time, he no longer saw a debtor, nor a scorned black woman. He saw only a person, eyes alight with fire, glowing in the darkest night of his life. Ezekiel shut his eyes, but the image burned on, and he knew from that moment forward nothing would remain as it had been. In the days following the canyon accident, Boone Ranch seemed to breathe new air. Ezekiel Boone, the young master once known only for barking orders, began to change. He listened when Clara Mayfield spoke, no longer spitting scorn at every suggestion. The numbers in the ledgers held fewer mistakes. The work assignments for the hands fell into order. Out in the fields, Ezekiel learned to step back, letting the seasoned men handle the tasks they knew best. He observed, offering quiet words instead of sharp rebukes. One morning when young Tommy fumbled with the gate latch, Ezekiel approached and said only, slow and steady, "Fasten another wire here. It'll hold stronger." The boy looked up, startled. He was used to scowls and harsh words, not patient instruction. That shift carried into the crew. Whispers quieted. The air of labor grew steadier. The ranch began to prosper. Cattle grew sleek, fodder piled high. Deliveries met their mark. From afar, Hoyt Boone watched his son with a gaze heavy with disbelief at the change. Miriam Boone, in her heart, knew the reason lay not in time nor duty, but in one person, a black woman the town had long despised. But beyond the ranch, rumors crawled through Eden Hollow. In the market stalls, voices hissed, "Boone's boy is bewitched by that black woman." They say they live under the same roof, as though she were his mistress. Shame on the Boone name, to let a debtor woman run the ranch. The gossip spread like prairie fire in summer grass. Each time Ezekiel rode into town, he felt the eyes, heard the stifled laughter. Pride, the marrow of his blood, turned heavy as stone. One evening, at supper in the Boone house, the family and several hands gathered around the long table. Clara carried in a steaming pot, her dress faint with the smoke of the kitchen. The others waited for her to sit, a habit grown since she had taken charge of the household rhythm. A gray-haired hand muttered without thought, "Don't know where Boone Ranch would be without Miss Mayfield's hand." The words meant no harm. Yet in Ezekiel's ears they struck sharp. He heard the echo of town jeers. Boone's boy bewitched. Shame and anger rose, his wineglass clattering against the wood. Suddenly his voice cut, cold as steel. "Do not exaggerate. Clara is but a hired hand. Do not forget her place." The room froze. Forks and spoons halted midair. Every gaze shifted to Clara. She stilled. The words hung clear, a blade drawn before all. It spilled no blood, yet pierced straight through, her lips pressed tight, her brown eyes deep with pain and dignity entwined. She did not protest. She did not beg. She simply bowed her head, nodded once and returned to her meal. But her hand trembled on the spoon, broth spilling over the bowl's edge. Miriam Boone nearly spoke, but her son's glare stopped her. Hoyt only sighed, leaning back heavy in his chair. The hands kept their eyes down, silent as stone. That night, in her small room at the far wing, Clara sat by an old valise. The lamp flame threw her shadow stiff against the wall. She opened the drawer, gathering what little she owned. A faded dress, a handkerchief from her mother, the small ledger she kept. Each was laid in the case with calm precision. Her patience had met its end. She had borne the town's mockery, endured slights for her skin, her debt, her station. But when Ezekiel, who had shared the ledger's toil with her, whose life she had saved in the canyon, cast such words before the crowd, the wound ran too deep. Her whisper broke the silence, roughened by restraint. I have given all I could. If he sees only a servant, then I will go. The case snapped shut, the lock clicking like the hammer of a gun sealing fate. Clara blew out the lamp. Moonlight spilled through the window, silver across her face, serene, unbroken. In the main house, Ezekiel lay restless, eyes wide. His words from supper echoed sharp, each syllable a blade turned inward. He had thought they would set him free of shame, proof he was not bewitched. Instead, a hollow ache spread in his chest. A faint sound stirred the hall, the roll of a valise along the floorboards. Ezekiel shut his eyes, but his heart pounded. He knew the sound. Clara was packing. Clara was leaving. And for the first time in his life, Ezekiel Boone understood. There are wounds that shed no blood, yet are deadly enough to kill something within a man. The hinges creaked in the still night. Clara Mayfield had set her suitcase square at the threshold, her hand firm on the handle as if the first gust of wind would carry her out. Outside, the gale swept red dust across the yard, whipping the faded curtain like a banner. "Clara!" Ezekiel's voice broke the silence, urgent, almost shattering. He stumbled down the hall, bandaged arm bound tight, breath ragged. His boots struck the boards like hammer blows. She did not turn. Her hand tightened on the handle, her voice calm. "Where I go matters little. What matters is that I cannot remain here." Ezekiel halted, eyes blazing beneath the wavering lamp. He stretched out his good arm, desperate to hold her there. "Please, don't go. I am sorry." The words I flung before them. "They wounded you. I should never have spoken so." Clara turned then, her deep brown eyes steady, her face composed. "Words, once loosed, are arrows. They strike, and no apology can pull them back." His chest clenched. He lurched closer, but her gaze, unyielding, froze him in place. "You don't understand." His voice rasped, broken. "Since the night you hauled me out of the canyon, I have carried a restlessness I could not name. Each time I spoke cruelly for pride's sake. It was as if barbs tore at my own heart. I pretended I did not care, yet every night your eyes haunted me, and regret devoured me." Clara blinked, her grip unmoved on the case. "Ezekiel, regret fades. The wounds of words remain. You are Boone blood, with years before you. I am only a black woman, in debt, past the age of being loved. The words fell like hammers. Ezekiel stepped close enough to catch her breath and burst out, unable to contain it. Clara, I don't know when it began, but I love you. The room stilled. The lamp flame shuddered, casting his face in trembling gold, stripped of pride, bare with truth. I cannot live without you, he whispered, his voice breaking. I love the way you defy me, the way your eyes blaze at falsehood, the way your calloused hands still tend my wounds. I love the silence you bear before scorn, stronger than any outcry. Clara's heart hammered, though her face remained calm. You love me? Ezekiel, love is not a word gasped in weakness. Love must withstand the world's scorn. Ezekiel nodded fiercely, eyes lit with fire. That is why I beg forgiveness. I wounded you with hollow pride. I would fall to my knees and confess I was never too good for you. It was I who was never worthy of you. Awkward, desperate, he dropped to one knee, his bandaged arm pressed to his side, his voice trembling. Stay. Not for Boone Ranch. Not for my parents. For me. For I love you, Clara. She turned away, drawing a deep breath. His words tore through the fences she had built around her heart. Yet the scars of too many nights whispered caution. Softly, she said, Ezekiel, love cannot erase skin nor age. You have years ahead. I have walked more than half already. He surged up, his good hand seizing hers, trembling yet firm. No, you are my future. What measure has age over the strength of a heart? What veil can skin cast over the light in your eyes? They call you a debtor, but in my eyes, you are the only one who ever taught me what worth truly is. Clara trembled, silent. Her hand no longer gripped the suitcase. Tears brimmed, but she held her head high. Ezekiel, she whispered, testing his vow. His grip tightened, his voice low but resolute. I will bear every debt beside you. I will stand before the town and proclaim I love you, unshaken. Forgive me, Clara. Stay, for I cannot draw breath without you. The door shuddered in the wind, urging decision. Clara looked to the suitcase, then to the raw truth blazing in his eyes. Her heart warred between reason and the plea of his words. The house held its breath. Only the wind and the pounding of two hearts remained. And in that fragile silence, Ezekiel's choked confession hung like a blade, not to wound, but to cut open the gate of hope. At dawn, spring winds swept across Boone Ranch, carrying the damp scent of new grass and the calls of gathering birds. The fields stretched endless and green, brighter than any season before. Clara Mayfield stood quietly on the porch, her hands brushing the hem of her freshly washed dress. Her eyes followed the first shafts of sunlight slipping through the fence rails, a strange blend of strangeness and belonging rising in her chest. Behind her came the uneven tread of boots. Ezekiel Boone emerged, his arm no longer bandaged, only a faint scar left behind. He stepped to her side, his large hand closing over her smaller one. In his eyes there was no longer the arrogance of a young heir, but the calm of a man who had chosen his path. From the main house came Hoyt and Miriam Boone, the wind tugging softly at their silvered hair. Their gazes held no sternness now, only gratitude deep and quiet. Hoyt's voice rumbled low, carrying steady on the morning air. My son, at last you stand on your own feet, and I know it was Clara who taught you. Miriam nodded gently, her eyes meeting Clara's, shining yet warm. Without you, Clara, Boone Ranch might have fallen. Without you, so might we. We are truly grateful. Clara bowed her head slightly, saying nothing. She had never sought recognition. Yet their words fell upon her heart like spring rain on parched earth. Ezekiel's grip tightened around her hand. He turned to his parents, his voice clear, resolute. I am not only grateful, I love Clara. She did not just pull me from the canyon or from my blindness. She saved Boone Ranch itself, and I will hold her hand all my life. A silence spread. Hoyt looked into his son's eyes, then nodded firmly, placing his weathered hand on the young man's shoulder. If that is your choice, I will not stand against it. A man is only truly grown when he learns to protect what he loves. The following spring, Eden Hollow's fields blazed gold beneath the sun. On the wide meadow, the entire town had gathered. Whispers darted through the crowd, eyes sharp with curiosity and judgment. Yet none left. They had come to witness what none had believed possible. Ezekiel Boone stood among the grass, clad in a white shirt and a plain brown coat. At his side was Clara Mayfield, her dark blue dress simple, her gaze steady, unafraid. He took her hand, raising his voice so it carried across the hush of hundreds. This woman, once called debt-ridden, worthless, a shadow on Boone Ranch, she is the treasure of this land. She is my treasure. The silence that followed was heavy and unbroken. No laughter, no sneer. Only the spring wind moving over the grass, carrying its sweet scent and the pounding of hearts. Clara lifted her head. In that moment, her brown eyes caught the light and blazed like fire. Every jeer of the past seemed to dissolve, leaving one truth. Boone Ranch endured and thrived by her hands and her heart. From the crowd, an old ranch hand, the same who had once sneered at her straining under sacks of grain, slowly removed his hat. One by one others followed, until the field was bare of hats, heavy with silent acknowledgement. Ezekiel turned, resting his brow against Clara's, his voice lowered for her alone. You once said you were too old to be loved, but you taught me love is not counted in years, only in the times we rise for one another. Tears welled in Clara's eyes, but her lips curved in a smile. For the first time, it was not the smile of endurance, but of joy fulfilled. Above, birds wheeled free against the sky. The spring wind rushed the fields, bearing witness to a vow no rumor could erase. Boone Ranch had found its treasure, and Eden Hollow bowed before the truth of it. That morning, sunlight filled the little wooden chapel of Eden Hollow. The old white doors stood wide, letting the spring wind sweep in with the scent of grass and the song of birds. The townsfolk had gathered in full, from gray-haired farmers to young girls whispering behind their hands. They no longer came to witness a scandal, but to behold what they knew would become a story retold for generations. Clara Mayfield stepped inside, her small frame clothed in a simple cream dress. There was no lace, no glittering jewels, only a thin shawl draped over her shoulders. Yet her face shone with a light that hushed the crowd. The woman once called worthless, once dismissed as a shadow, now walked as the heart of the ceremony. Ezekiel Boone waited at the end of the aisle, in a white shirt and light brown coat, his eyes bright as April skies. When Clara drew near, he reached for her hand, trembling yet steady. Silence fell across the chapel. The pastor's voice rose, deep and steady, repeating the vows carried from frontier days, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, till death do you part. Ezekiel spoke his I do, firm and clear. Clara answered, her voice husky yet unwavering. When the rings were exchanged, sunlight broke through the window, falling across their joined hands so that the gold blazed like fire. Breath caught in the crowd, and then thunderous applause shook the rafters as the pastor declared them husband and wife. The wedding feast was no grand affair. A long table stood out in the meadow, laden with hastily cooked dishes, fresh-baked bread, and corn liquor poured into stoneware cups. Laughter rang across the fields, the fiddle's lively tune spun through the air, children racing barefoot over green grass. Ezekiel leaned close to his bride, his voice rough but tender. You once said you were too old to be loved. But Clara, love does not count the years. It counts only the times one stands for the other. And you've done that for me since the very first day. Clara tilted her head, tears glistening, her lips curved in a smile. His words washed away every hidden scar she had carried. In that moment, all her endurance, her pain, her quiet pride finally met its rightful answer. The meadow hushed at his words, then erupted in cheers, hands clapping, cups clinking. No one whispered the black woman's spell any longer. They saw only a young man kneeling before love, and a woman brave enough to rise from the shadow of scorn. Night fell, and fires blazed across the ranch yard. Beneath the stars, fiddle music carried, boots stamped in rhythm, laughter echoing into the dark. Clara sat beside Ezekiel, hand in hand, her gaze unafraid at last. Before them, Boone Ranch glowed, not from wealth, but from newfound faith. A young ranch hand lifted his cup and shouted, "A toast to Miss Mayfield! No, to Mrs. Boone, the woman who made this ranch a home!" Voices roared back, cups lifted high against the starlight. Ezekiel turned to his wife, murmuring, "To them you are a legend, but to me you need not be a legend. You need only be Clara, the woman who taught me how to be a man." Clara laughed softly, her voice warm. "And you taught me this, that even with debt, even with a color despised, the heart can still be chosen if someone dares to see." From that day forward, Boone Ranch was remembered not just for its cattle or its fields, but for the love story that silenced Eden Hollow. Folks spoke of it with reverence. Love does not measure years, nor divide by skin, nor tally by debts. It chooses only those who dare to hold on, no matter the storm. And in the springs that followed, whenever the wind swept the green fields, the people of Eden Hollow remembered that day, the day an arrogant boy became a man who loved, and a woman once thought too old to be loved, became the brightest treasure of Wyoming's prairies. For those who had walked many years, the story lingered as a simple, profound truth. Love is not possession, but lifting, standing, holding fast through the storm. At life's end, what remains is not the words of others, but the hand that held ours tight. If this story has touched your heart today, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe, so you can journey with us through more Wild West love stories.